In June of 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was abducted in the middle of the night from her Salt Lake City bedroom. Elizabeth was the most unlikely of victims in a crime that seemed without motive. Her abduction was so bizarre and unique a case that it transfixed America.
We gathered together as a family, as we always do, and had our evening prayer together, and put the kids in bed. I kissed the girls goodnight, and just were exhausted, and dropped off. The next thing I remember after going to sleep was Mary Catherine coming around the bed to Lois's side and saying, "Mom, somebody's taken Elizabeth." And, I'm sitting there in bed, I'm thinking, she's had a bad nightmare. Mary Catherine remained in the room with Lois. As I went from room to room checking, it became more and more of a reality that, she was not here. I came down the steps, looked through my office, went into our family room. She was not there. And it really erupted when Lois came down the stairs and turned on the lights in our kitchen and saw the screen cut. Mary Catherine had come down and said, "You're not going to find her, a man's taken her." And you just can't even imagine what was Elizabeth going through. Lois was yelling, "Call 911," and that was the first thing that happened.
When I arrived, the neighborhood was pretty much sealed off. We did a quick walk around, cursory look at the kitchen area window, and inside the bedroom where the abduction had taken place. There are a number of ways that somebody could have gotten into the home, anybody that was determined. The window's fairly high off the ground. For someone to climb through the window, they would have not only had to step up on the seat of the chair, they would have had to step up on the back of the chair just to make the cuts in the screen. If you have the plane of the window, then the window would open like this and kind of slide to the middle, and it's not a real wide window. So it left 12 or so inches that you could actually squeeze through.
When we got that call in the middle of the night, I could kind of tell that, something bad had happened, and Edward told us the story, and it's just, panic. Someone's taken Elizabeth with a gun, and, get down here. It was just it's just this sick, terrible feeling. It just struck your heart that this is the worst thing that could ever happen.
I remember walking in to the house and seeing Lois sitting on that couch, and it was just horrifying. I mean, she was just wailing, catatonic. It was just, this nightmare is real.
The Smarts' home had not been immediately sealed by the police, and all forensic clues to the abductor were contaminated. But there was one witness to the crime, Elizabeth's younger sister, who shared her bed, 9-year-old Mary Catherine.
Mary Catherine, right from day one, was very consistent in the account that she gave us. She talked about being awake, hearing Elizabeth up. There was conversation, including threats from the perpetrator to Elizabeth, threats against the family and against her.
The guy said, "Be quiet. If you scream, I'll shoot you, but if you don't, I won't harm you."
Did his voice sound familiar to you?
Yeah.
Can you tell me where you've heard that before?
No, I can't remember.
Mary Catherine mentioned that the voice was familiar to her. She thought she'd heard it before, although she was not able to say where for sure, but it seemed familiar, but not a whole lot more that we could go on.
I couldn't imagine. I couldn't even fathom who would want her, who would take her, who would. I didn't really feel like I had any enemies. I didn't feel like there was anyone out there that would want to, that I knew of, that I could. It was the farthest thing from my mind.
When you're missing a young 14-year-old girl, you certainly have to consider a sex crime as a motive. Elizabeth had to have been a chosen victim, very specifically targeted by her abductor.
Until that terrible night, the Smarts had led a privileged and happy life.
The Smart family are people of faith, and they want to be good people. They want to live what they think they should be to be a good community member and a good Mormon church member. They wanted Elizabeth to sort of set an example for her siblings, younger siblings, which she did. So they invested a lot in her, encouraging her to do what's right, encouraging her to live the teachings of the church. She was had a happy disposition, and she was a believer. She had faith.
She just really was kind of the pride and joy, I think, of Edward and Lois. She was so perfect. At 14 years old, she wasn't interested in boys. She was interested in the harp and horses.
A lot of people sometimes ask us if we're sisters or even twins once in a while. Sometimes when I go down to their house, they've got a gym in their basement. We like to just play dumb games. They have these really big bouncy balls, probably about 2 feet in diameter. We like to hold them, and we call it sumo wrestlers, and we run into each other with the balls.
It was apparent pretty early on that she had a real low rating as a victim profile. She didn't hang out in front of the mall. She was not an active chat room participant on the internet. She was not hanging out with a boyfriend. She didn't participate in the kinds of things that would make her a likely victim. And she didn't have the kinds of conflicts even in the home and those kind of things that would make her run away or even stage something like this.
Everyone, it's 7:27 and we have a major story breaking at this hour. A 14-year-old girl kidnapped from her home by an intruder during the night in the Federal Heights area.
Elizabeth, if you're out there, we're doing everything we possibly can to help you. We love you. We want you to come home safely to us.
With every hour, the chance of finding Elizabeth alive was decreasing. Ed's oldest brother, Tom, a news photographer, took charge.
I didn't want to wait a week later to find out whether the person down the street who, may have, whoever it was, did it or not. I mean, you have a sense of urgency that's immediate. The press is your friend in this situation. We need to get out there. And we did, and that all went out on the 10 o'clock news.
You're watching KSL-5. This is the #1 Eyewitness News Special Report.
We begin today with the statewide alert for the missing girl and the man who took her.
Now, the kidnapping happened around 2 o'clock this morning, again, as we said, in the Salt Lake Federal Heights area. Abducted from her bedroom at gunpoint. And as Terry said,
what the Smart family did was they just said, this is who she is. And all of the photographs and the video clips and everything. Elizabeth was an angelic little girl who'd been kidnapped. And she really was. She was this innocent, bright-eyed, obedient girl who played the harp. She became a symbol of, I think, innocence and a victim.
She doesn't do anything to anyone, and there's no reason that you should have her. Please let her go, please.
Tom rallied the family that first night, to go in front of those cameras and plead with the community to come out and help. Every minute counts, every second counted, and everybody knew that. And the response the next day was just phenomenal. At 7:30, we started having searchers showing up. I brought about 450 volunteer registration forms. At 10 o'clock, I had someone from the registration desk come up to me and say, we're out of forms. By the end of the day, the count was up to close to 1,800 searchers that had come through the center.
The support and the love of the community were so great and everything, and I really, it seemed to become bigger than all of us in a way.
It was just incredible. The sacrifices that everybody made.
So anybody who has a car, raise their hand.
Everybody could relate to a teenage girl being snatched from her bedroom in the middle of the night. That's everyone's kind of personal nightmare. And if it could happen to these people where they had a security system and where they're in an area that doesn't typically have a lot of crime, that could happen to anyone.
The trauma of Elizabeth's abduction was too much for her father. He collapsed and was taken into hospital.
And I couldn't stop thinking about Lois, and Elizabeth, and the family, and where I was, and what was happening. Felt like my life was coming apart at the seams, and they gave me a blessing, and I felt the Lord speak to me and say, you know, you've got to get up, you've got to go home, you've got to go forward.
So much what you've done. It's so overwhelming to see. They told me people were here, but it's overwhelming.
We brought Edward and Lois down to see the amazing things that were going on down at that search center, and they were completely overwhelmed by it.
It was almost like it gave them strength. The community gave them strength to continue on when they saw the effort that was going on. It was just incredible.
Join us for a moment of silence to pray, to simply hope for the best, to send your best wishes.
That night, as Lois and I prayed, my prayer took on a completely different view from what it had previously been. It was one of the purest forms of communication between Lois and I. It was one of the most comforting feelings that we had ever felt. I truly felt like, you know, the Lord was there, that He was watching over us, and that somehow we were going to make it through.
A week after the unexplained kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart, the family's ordeal took an ugly turn. Ed Smart and his brothers were taken into FBI headquarters for questioning.
We took polygraph test. I had taken mine with 5 days no sleep, working on my 6th day no sleep. I mean, I was literally hearing things. Some of the questions, I mean, they're hard to answer in that situation. Have you ever hurt anyone? You know, I don't, you know. Yeah, I'm sure I have. Have you, you know, are you honest? Do you lie to your wife? You know, well, I told her I didn't like her hairdo once, and I've lied to her, you know. I mean, I lie for love and I lie for sport, but I don't lie for real.
Questions like, did you kill Elizabeth? Did you take Elizabeth? Did you have anything to do with her abduction?
My polygraph was between 7 and 8 hours. But, you know, in that included a 2-hour stare down with the guy when I said, you know, I can't do anything else. I can't, I mean, I'm inconclusive, fine, it's in your court.
I'm under the microscope as someone who could have taken her, and I didn't take her. I know I didn't take her.
I just kept staring him in the eye, giving him eye contact and thinking to myself, whatever Elizabeth's going through, I can do this.
You know, I didn't care at that point. I just felt like, do whatever you want with me. I want to find Elizabeth, and it doesn't matter.
They know they didn't do it. We're not 100% of anything at that point. You can't go up and say, well, I know you didn't do it, but come on, let's do the interview. You know, don't let this hurt your feelings. I mean, we kind of have to play the role. If we're going to interview them, we have to, you know, put them on the spot and kind of put some pressure on, or we might as well not bother with the interviews.
The police initially floated a theory that perhaps they had some financial problems, and this was a way to produce a ransom note and maybe alleviate those financial problems. It's interesting how one problem or one tragedy all of a sudden just escalates, and this family that's already been hit once is now being hit again in national headlines that by innuendo say, hey, it's the family.
At that point, once they're starting leaking these things out, they had never talked to my wife. They'd never checked on my alibi. They had never done any, I mean, the Keystone cops could have figured out this. You know, I mean, it just, so it was really a little bit irresponsible wherever those leaks came from, in a feeding frenzy, when there's no information out there, and you have everybody, and you know how this works in the press, they see one little thing, and it's like in a hen house with a chicken that gets a spot of blood on its head, all the other chickens go peck it to death, and that's what the press does. Yeah, I was under suspicion, but I didn't care if I was under suspicion. The only reason why I would care about me being under suspicion was if it's taking away from finding who the real person is.
As the media continued to question the credibility of the Smarts, the FBI were honing in on another suspect.
Behavioral analysis gave me an assessment of what they thought the behavior of the abductor may be. This was a sex crime. That they certainly could have burglary in their criminal history or something like that. There was a list, what we call the contractor list, a list of people who had worked at the house, helping fix it up. On this list was Richard Reese.
Reese was, you know, he's just very, very sociable. He was very friendly. He was, you know, talking to my sons about snowmobiling or playing. He was an engaging type of person.
He had a criminal history that came out to us right away when we started running his name. He was on parole and was out of the prison for an attempted homicide on a police officer escaping from a burglary. He had been accused at one point of stealing an expensive bracelet that Lois had. And so his name came up from Lois, it came up from the kids, it came up from a neighbor saying, we think you need to look at this guy, he may be a bad guy.
I didn't have the slightest clue that he had any record, that he was any kind of a threat.
Richard Reese was a burglar who liked to go into people's homes and steal things, and sometimes when the people were in them. And when they investigated his trailer where he was living, they found items that he had stolen from Ed and Lois Smart.
The theory with Richard Reese was that he was burglarizing the house. She woke up and recognized him. He knew that if he went back to prison, he probably wasn't getting out, and that he had taken her away as a witness.
This evidence was horrendous. I mean, this was Richard's mode of breaking into a house at night, apparently not afraid of being caught or getting a thrill, because he was willing to do this in the middle of the night. And he had gotten away with it, I guess. I don't know how many times I don't know how many times he did it. But that just absolutely crushed us.
Do you know why you're here?
Yeah.
Tell me why you're here.
Yeah, because of Elizabeth.
Right. When was the last time you were in that fucking house?
In April, when I picked up the tire.
Tell me what you know about the kidnapping.
I don't.
Oh, shit. You couldn't live in this valley for the last 2.5 weeks and not know something about the kidnapping. I'm not playing games. I'm not saying tell me why you did the kidnapping. I'm saying tell me what you know about it, what you've heard on the news, what you've seen in the press.
Somebody broke into Smart's house.
Okay.
Took Elizabeth.
Okay.
Now I'm the #1 suspect.
A new face, some possible new evidence, and a set of intriguing new questions in the disappearance of Elizabeth Smart.
A man with a long history of criminal behavior leaps to the top of the list of suspicious people in the Smart case. Let's take a closer look at Richard Reese and why police find him interesting. Reese was familiar with the Smart home.
Richard's face was on TV, and Mary Catherine saw it. And she said, what's Richard's face doing on there? It wasn't him. And, you know, of course, we, passed all of this information on. You've got to realize, too, that it was very dark in that room. And so we still had this big question mark going on in our mind. Could she really see someone in there?
I was fairly comfortable that Mary Catherine, by looking at someone, couldn't identify her suspect. That she didn't have that in her memory. She didn't see this person's face.
Oh, you want to hear some fucking shit? Want me to make up some bullshit?
No, I don't want you to make up bullshit.
Well, then fucking believe me, John, God damn it.
Well, there's too many things that don't.
Well, I don't get what... Find out who in the fuck did this shit.
Well, that's what I'm working on.
You've got 5 or 6 guys working on it.
I've got 80 fucking guys.
Well, why ain't you fucking coming up with something, God damn it?
I'm sitting in this room talking.
Fuck, I've taken lie detectors, I've given blood, I've fucking done every fucking thing you guys have asked me.
But you didn't pass.
So far, police say they have no forensic evidence to tie Reese directly to the crime. But there is a growing mound of circumstantial evidence, all of it leading police to continue their focus on the former Smart handyman.
8 weeks after Elizabeth was taken, there was another break-in attempt at her cousin's house.
We were awakened by a loud bang on July 24th at 2:30 in the morning. I heard a loud crash. I knew right where it was. It was in my daughter's room. We met each other in the hallway. She said, "Dad, somebody's trying to come into my room." Then she saw a sharp object coming in and out. I said, "We better call the police." And so we dialed 911. It's too coincidental not to be connected because of the screen cut the same way, the 2 chairs placed back to back the same way. It's got to be connected somehow.
Okay, cut screen. A cut screen by itself on a summertime burglary is not a big deal. You know, a lot of burglaries in the summer, open window, cut a screen. It's an easy way to make an entry. So that by itself was not that terribly unique. The chair underneath the window now is a match, but the window at the Smart's home is like almost 6 feet off the ground. Well, the window is only 4 feet off the ground at the Wright's home. So they don't need the chair to go through the window. And so we just assume, okay, well, it's, you know, we have a bunch of kids out doing pranks in the neighborhood. They put the chair there to do a copycat. That's a likely scenario.
This is not the work of no kid. No kid would be brave enough to put 2 chairs up, slit them with a knife, and try to break in and then run out.
But I'll tell you what, it rang true to us. I mean, every one of the cousins was sleeping with each other or their parents, or David put in an alarm system that weekend. I mean, it scared the hell out of everybody.
There was nothing conclusive that said it was related, nor anything conclusive that said that it wasn't.
By this time, we had pretty much been told that, you know, they were reasonably certain it was Richard Reese and everything. Well, you know, Richard Reese wasn't on McFennerty's top 5 list of potential suspects.
I was now getting very adamant about investigating other people because Reese was in prison. He had a pretty good alibi. We know he didn't try and break into the Wrights' residence. I mean, that should have been it.
With Elizabeth's fate still unknown, the police were wanting answers and increased their pressure on Richard Reese.
And you know that I think you're involved in this. I want to hear if you were in there and you were doing this and she woke up, what would you do? And you're telling me I
I'm
won't
not
be
going to
scared?
sit here and fucking tell you, pal.
Sit down, sit down. No.
It's never going to stop. It's never going to end. It's just going to go on.
Fuck, I'm at a fucking loss, dude. I mean, what? Put yourself in my motherfucking shoes. Shit. I didn't fuck around with no fucking girl. But damn. No, I didn't. Fuck, no.
You didn't any bruises?
No. God damn it, no.
Then, on August the 3rd, the investigation suffered an unexpected blow.
FBI agents called me and said, Corey, Reese's had some sort of problem medically. He's collapsed. They're life-flighting him and he's on life support. And I just kind of was, what? Wait a minute, you know, we got all these unanswered questions. So I made the call immediately up to Ed and Lois. Lois answered the phone and I just said, you know, it looks like he's probably brain dead and he's never going to be able to answer our questions. And Lois just says, oh my, and dropped the phone.
3 days later, Reese died.
He died less than 2 months after the kidnapping, but they were so sure that it was Richard Reese. In fact, when he died, they wouldn't even let his wife come and hug him after he died because he was considered this horrible man who had kidnapped Elizabeth Smart.
After Richard Reese died, everybody would come to us and say, you know, it's too bad. And I say, you know, it's still active. And literally, people who I worked with for years, they'd put their arm on my shoulder and say, you know, you really need to see somebody. I mean, they were really concerned that it was that you just can't give it up and everything. But, you know, the fact that we had searched so much and hadn't found a body or found any evidence at all was also somewhat, you know, somewhat reassuring. I mean, if we had found, you know, something to show that she wasn't alive, we certainly would have felt differently. But no, we couldn't let it go. We were after it.
I couldn't be angry at God. I knew that God was not the one doing this. I knew he wasn't. I was angry at somebody's choice to take my daughter. I remember hearing people in the background, there's Ed Smart. How can you think that she's still out there?
I remember sitting in my office and opening the drawer and going through the baptisms, those who've been baptized, and seeing her name on it, and just starting to cry. And at that point, my mind said to me, I don't think she's alive. And then my heart said, well, I'm not going to lose hope. I can't lose hope. And I read this to the congregation. Verily I say unto you, my friends, fear not. Let your hearts be comforted. Yea, rejoice evermore, and in everything give thanks. Waiting patiently on the Lord, for your prayers have entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth.
If there's a question at all, why should I be doubtful? I should be optimistic, because that's the best way to be. I thought about her a lot, and I thought about what I'd say to her when she came back. And I dreamed about it a lot. I always dreamt that she was there and I was coming to their house and what I would say to her. And they were always good dreams. And then I'd wake up and I'd be disappointed.
The investigators were really frustrated. We had followed psychic leads, sexual predator leads, devil worshiper leads, white collar, extortion type leads, motorcycle gang leads, internet predator leads. I mean, we had just chased down hundreds and hundreds of different theories and things, and yeah, people were discouraged.
I was mountain biking on a trail behind my house in July, about a month after the girl was taken. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, I was going up the trail, and I saw a man in the distance walking down the trail with two women behind him. They were wearing full gray robes. He had a very bushy beard. The two women had veiled faces with only their eyes showing.
I saw the man that our family calls Joseph walking from the sidewalk toward the street. He was staring straight ahead, walking quite rapidly, and at his side was a young girl dressed in similar clothing. I could see her eyes, and her eyes were quite sad.
My parents had come down to take my wife and myself and my kids out to a family-style restaurant, and sitting on a table that was just a few feet away from us was a man and a woman, and what I could identify then was a teenage girl.
They would stack up the vegetables on their plates, stack up the cucumbers, and I thought that they were probably eating a lot because they might not have regular meals.
The night Elizabeth was abducted, she was taken by her kidnapper at knife point, repeatedly told that she was evil, and threatened with the murder of her family if she tried to escape. Over time, her old identity was slowly erased. Her new name was Augustine. Disguised in a veil, she was seen following her abductor and his wife in and out of Salt Lake City. Dressed in white robes, the strange trio often walked along the canyon path which rose up behind her parents' home, just as she had done the night she was abducted. That first night, after being forced to climb for several hours, Elizabeth had eventually emerged into a heavily camouflaged hideaway. Here, her red pajamas were burnt, and she was taken by her kidnapper into his dugout, held down and raped. Abuse that would continue. Elizabeth was then shackled by a cable to a tree. Unable to shout out to the search parties, she could hear calling her name. She was still alive. More than 4 months after the abduction of Elizabeth Smart, the police and public had given up hope of finding her alive. But in October, Elizabeth's younger sister came forward with startling information.
It was about 10:30 or 11 o'clock, and Mary Catherine came in and said, "Dad, I think I know who it is. I think I know who it is." And I said, "Who?" And she said, "Emmanuel." And I thought to myself, I tried to go back in my mind, Emmanuel. Oh yes, that was this homeless preacher that had been here, that the girls had seen for maybe 5 minutes. I went back into her room and I sat down and I said, "Now, Mary Catherine, tell me how this came to you." She opened up her Guinness World Book of Records and turned to this page where there was a very muscular woman. And she said, "I don't know, I was looking through here and all of a sudden it came to me."
And it's like, what? And I mean, Edward just was completely dumbfounded, and she explained the story of, Emmanuel. He was a straight-laced person that Lois had given this $5 to 7 months before and invited up to the house. He had worked with Edward most of the time on the roof, working on a skylight up there.
She met him after school for, a couple of minutes. How did she do that? I believe it was a revelation from God. I truly, truly believe that.
Edward immediately, called and went down to the police station, talked to Corey Lyman and told him about it, and they arranged, for an interview with Mary Catherine.
Okay, you said you met him on the street. Do you know what street that was?
in the downtown, inside in that area, you know where a lot of homeless people go.
And when was the next time that you saw this man?
Oh, he came up to our house. So we came in the front door, and I know he saw me or we was going to our room.
Was Emmanuel the man who was in your bedroom?
I'm not quite sure. It might have been.
You're not quite sure, but it might have been?
Even though the eyewitness comes and says that she knows who it was who came in the house, it still didn't let Richard Reese off the hook. They said that they were looking for Emmanuel, and they told the Smart family, don't go public with this because we don't want to scare him off. To see how solidly stuck they were on Richard Reese is amazing. Amazing.
And it was just like, wait, this is the most important lead. Why are you discrediting it and trying to shut it down? I mean, for heaven's sakes, come on. This is the most important lead you guys have had. Nothing's happened with Reese. Give it up. You know, go with this.
Yeah, the family, you know, they had the only witness to the crime. They had the crime scene. I mean, you know, we had to work with them. I mean, they held the keys. They were the victims here. And they had the most information to help solve the case.
Elizabeth was told not to speak. She lived hand to mouth off the beggings of her white-robed abductor, a man she had met briefly many months previously. Her new life took her into a strange world that she had never known before.
I saw these three people standing on the doorstep. I just thought it was some people coming in costume to a party. He was saying that they needed to explore the spirits of this house. And so I invited them in. I said, come in.
I thought that the girl that was veiled was like 19 or 21, that age group.
She's tall. She's a good 5'6", 5'7", and she does not come across, I mean, all the posters and all the pictures that you ever saw in the news, it looked like a little girl. Emmanuel was very charismatic. He would had a way of kind of manipulating people. He had very intense eyes, and he would just keep going on. Testosterone, alcohol, and religious dogma at, you know, midnight is really not a good combo.
These people were chanting some kind of biblical curse or something, like they were saying, burn, burn.
The two women were kind of standing there on the sidelines, and I asked them, you know, are you okay? Do you need any help? You know, you don't have to go with this guy. And they pretty much ignored me and just followed after him and wandered away into the night.
Elizabeth's kidnapper, Emmanuel, was born Brian David Mitchell. The middle son in a strict Mormon family, Brian was severely punished, taking the brunt of his father's anger. Even as a child, Brian showed an excessive interest in sex.
We had a book at home that had explicit pictures of the genitalia, you know, and he promptly proceeded to play doctor in a little hut in the backyard with the neighborhood kids, and that got him, we got a little feedback from their parents for that.
Brian's accomplice, Wanda Baze, grew up on the other side of Salt Lake. With her father away on business, Wanda was brought up by her mother, and from an early age she developed a disquieting sense of insecurity.
Wanda was always bashful and clung to me whenever we were in public. She would have to stand by me and hang on to my leg. So she always felt more secure. She hanging on to Mommy.
By the age of 13, Brian was the black sheep in the Mitchell family. He got into drugs and alcohol, and by his first year at high school, Brian was caught preying upon very young girls.
A little neighbor girl came in the house, and he exposed himself to her, and that's what started his trouble with juvenile authorities. And he met some unsavory characters in juvenile detention, and things went from bad to worse.
Wanda's attentions were more wholesome. She was a committed Mormon. When her first marriage of 20 years broke down, Wanda found herself in counseling, and it was there that she met Brian Mitchell. 18 months later, she was married. Brian and Wanda devoted their lives to God. The current teachings of the Mormon Church did not satisfy Brian. He adopted out-of-favor beliefs, which cast him as the Lord and Master, with the right to take multiple wives. Brian displayed disturbing signs of sadism towards his new stepdaughter.
She had a pet rabbit named Peaches. One night they were feeding her something. She asked what was for dinner. I told her chicken, and she ate it. And they didn't have any. They had something else. And the next day she asked where her rabbit was, and they said, "You ate it." They cooked it and fed it to her.
Brian and Wanda were becoming increasingly fervent.
They woke me up and their eyes were like big, and I almost thought they were on acid. And they're like, "Mark, we have to tell you something." And in Brian's weird, soft voice, he's like, "We saw angels tonight," you know. I'm just like, "Whoa, really?" They're like, "Yes, we saw the angels of the Lord. They've spoken to us."
Their revelations told Brian and Wanda to leave Salt Lake and develop survival skills. 3 years later, they returned with a manifesto and a mission. She was Elada, and he, Emmanuel, David, Isaiah. On November the 16th, to mark Elizabeth's 15th birthday, a concert was held in her memory. It was now 4 weeks since Mary Catherine had told her father that it was Emmanuel who'd abducted Elizabeth. And the family were increasingly angry at the police's reluctance to take action.
We discussed going public. Like I said, we did not feel like Emmanuel was a strong suspect based on the logic of the whole thing. We were concerned about creating a false frenzy.
A lot of us, especially Tom and I, and a lot of our siblings were just like, okay, they've had enough time, let's go public with this. Let's go and do this now.
That's when all of a sudden things started to fall apart with the police.
Week by week, I personally felt like, I was losing grasp on what this person looked like, because initially it was like it came right back to me, but it was fading and fading, and I worried that I wouldn't be able to come up with something. There was about a 5 or 6 week period of time that went by, and when I finally started doing a sketch.
Fortuitously for Brian David Mitchell, in his kidnap scheme, when he went to work for the Smarts, he was a clean-cut preacher named Emmanuel. And the composite drawing of Emmanuel wouldn't have ever caught him.
In October, before the search for Emmanuel had even begun, Elizabeth was taken to Salt Lake City bus station. With her veil tied tightly across her face, she boarded a bus and left her hometown and fast-approaching winter behind her. The long journey took Elizabeth hundreds of miles away to Lakeside, a small cowboy town in Southern California.
If you were living on the streets, Lakeside would be an optimal place to be, a sort of area where outward unusual appearance does not necessarily draw undue attention to oneself. So if someone were to blend into an area of San Diego County and have a relatively easy time of it, I would suspect that Lakeside would be a choice.
We started calling them the worshipers because they were dressed so odd, like something out of a Cecil B. DeMille biblical movie.
They usually had a veil that would cover them like that with their hat, so all you could see were their eyes.
Talking to them, I asked them, why are the women veiled? Are you Muslim? And real quickly, see, the women never answered themselves. It was always him that talked. He answered, these women are veiled to protect them from the sins of the world. And at that point I went, oh, of course.
Well, they came into the park, and at that point we discovered they weren't Arabs because he was walking around with a Bible trying to raise money. It really piercing eyes.
There's no law that says you can't be dressed different, you can't look different. And in this country, people are to have religious freedom. And we have to also respect, not have to, but we do respect cultural diversity and ethnic diversity. And it would be out of the question just to simply walk over and pull their veil off just to identify them.
I received a radio call of aggressive panhandlers. So I asked for his personal information, and he gave me his name as David Sherlson. He identified the older lady as Alada Sherlson, his wife, and the young girl as Esther Sherlson, and said that she was his daughter. And I ran the names and dates of birth that he gave me through their computer system. There was nothing on them.
In Lakeside, Elizabeth lived with her kidnappers in the bottom of a dried-out riverbed. They slept on the ground in a tucked-away camp, under the cover of brush and rough tarpaulin.
Brian David Mitchell's a very manipulative human being. On the one hand, he uses his belief to draw attention to himself when he feels that necessary, to gain shelter, money, food, clothing, but he also uses it as a way to have people stay away from him. When you engage him in conversation, certainly as law enforcement, he'll take off on a tirade, and that gives him a bit of insulation from further investigation.
Edward, Tinkerbell, come on.
It was now the new year, 8 months since Elizabeth was taken.
Both Mom and Dad have been so wonderful to us, and so understanding, and so considerate.
The Smarts were increasingly frustrated at the police's reluctance to publicize Emmanuel as a suspect. They started planning to go it alone.
Finally, we got to a point where, you know, enough time is enough time. And whether you like it or not, we're going forward. It wasn't even so much the sketch as the story of this homeless preacher. That was what we wanted to hear.
I talked with him about where he was from, what he was doing. He indicated to me that he was from all over, that he was going about the country from homeless shelter to homeless shelter, preaching born-again Christianity.
By almost shotgun blasting that press conference out to the public, it hit the one person that it needed to hit, Emmanuel's sister. When she read about this street preacher named Emmanuel who occasionally did handiwork on homes, a chill went down her back. That's my brother. She called in and she said to the police, I want this to be anonymous, but I know who that is, and his name's Brian David Mitchell. The Smart family was unequivocal in that we need to find this guy. Tom particularly got maniacal about it. What Tom did was he jumped inside the investigation. Whether the police or the FBI wanted him there or not, and most of them didn't, he wouldn't take no for an answer, and he became absorbed with the investigation. And what the police couldn't or wouldn't tell him, he'd go find out another way.
Tom called Brian Mitchell's sister. Her husband gave him key information.
Lisa, this is Tom Smart. I am Elizabeth Smart's uncle, and I guess that there's a guy that we've been looking for. He calls himself Emmanuel, I guess, dressed up like Jesus. Personally, I would be very, very surprised if he did have anything to do with it, but he's just crazy enough, and that there's possibilities. You know that he does have a teepee that he's had up in the mountains, but he has never, ever let any of the family know where. Right. If he really does have something to do with it, there's a really good chance that she's still alive.
Tom scoured Salt Lake looking for Brian Mitchell. He discovered the cafe that the trio had frequented.
I went to all 3 soup and salads and took posters down, and I talked to one of the managers there, and she says, "Oh yeah, Mary and Joseph. You know, the last time I saw him, he was with a woman and a girl." I said, "Do you think that girl's Elizabeth?" And she said, "Yeah, I think it could be." And it took me to my knees. I dropped like a lightning bolt, and I just thought, my God, she's out there.
If he has her, she is still alive. And that was the thing that just exploded.
Good evening. We start off...
America's Most Wanted ran the story.
The Smarts were hoping someone would recognize this face, and someone did. Police got a call from a woman who...
Now we knew there was a man by the name of Brian David Mitchell, that he was a street person, that when Lois Smart had brought him to the house to work, he was clean shaven. He had a short haircut. She met him downtown. He took a bus up himself to the house to work on the roof. And Ed remembered it. And Mary Catherine wasn't making it up. And there was a guy, and his name was Brian David Mitchell. So now we wanted to hunt for Brian David Mitchell.
Oblivious to the national media coverage, the San Diego police had Brian Mitchell in custody.
Brian David Mitchell spent 3 days in the local jail. He had broken into a local Presbyterian church. He was charged. He was seen in court. The judge assigned a restitution payment to the church for a broken window.
I had, for the first time in 22 years, I got drunk that night. And the whole night was just a nightmare, and it was this week in jail has been like Jonah getting swallowed by the whale. It's turned me right around.
We were a bit chagrined that we had actually had him in custody on a burglary, not been aware that Salt Lake authorities were interested in him even for questioning. We had identified him as Brian David Mitchell, but at that time we were not aware of anyone looking for him criminally.
Back in Salt Lake, Tom was uncovering more, disturbing information from Brian's family about how he had abused them as children.
We knew Brian had the big beard, and the sketch was clean shaven and clean cut. That's why I never made the connection, you know. And then my grandma says, well, he did cut his hair. Then I was like, well, God, it's him then.
Wanda's sons called me and said, you know, we have pictures and everything. And included in these pictures they gave us was a picture of Brian David Mitchell without a beard. So I emailed it over to my brother, Edward.
And I downloaded those, and I just about fell off my chair. This was the one. This was the one. Are we breaking through?
Mitchell's appearance changes dramatically, depending on the length of his hair and beard. There are reports of Mitchell living in a teepee and walking the...
Now, more tips came in and said, he's a street preacher. He doesn't look like that anymore. He looks like a member of the Taliban. He's got robes, a long beard. He's a scumbag. He goes from homeless shelter. The whole house of cards started to fall.
When Brian was released from prison, he decided they should leave California. Elizabeth was taken on the bus with just her filthy bedroll. She had on sunglasses and a grey wig for disguise. When asked, she told people she'd had an eye operation. The trio bussed and hitchhiked their way northwards. When the bus stopped, Elizabeth disembarked and found herself in Sandy, a suburb of Salt Lake City.
It was on Wednesday, March 12th. It was approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had stopped down at this red light. I noticed 3 individuals on the sidewalk, and I said to my husband, look at the way these people are dressed, because they really look different, you know, with their clothing. When they got approximately right here at the driveway, I turned and looked, and he turned and looked at me right in the face. I knew it was him once I saw the face, because it was the same expression I had seen on the pictures on the television. I walked around the front of the car to the passenger side, and I told my husband, I said, give me your cell phone, that's him, I'm calling the police.
When I got out of my car, I stopped them, asked them if they would stop and talk to me. I had some questions for them.
I asked them what their names were. They gave me Peter Marshall, Juliet Marshall, and Augustine Marshall.
But this girl standing off to the side really stood out to me because she had this disguise on. It just didn't fit.
She was wearing a wig, a gray-haired wig, claiming that she was 17 or 18. She was the only one out of 3 wearing some sort of disguise. So once we kind of keyed into, well, she does kind of look like Elizabeth Smart.
She then said something like, I think you know who I think I am, but I'm not that person. And I said, well, who do you think we think you are? And she says, you think I'm that Elizabeth Smart girl. She says, well, I'm not that girl. I held up the poster right next to her face and said, Elizabeth, this is you. She says, no, that's not me.
At one point I could see her t-shirt actually moving. Her heart was pounding very fast in her chest.
Her eyes welled up with tears. You could tell she wanted just to physically say it, but she wouldn't. And I says, Elizabeth, just for your peace of mind and your families, tell me that you're Elizabeth Smart. And she says, thou say it then. And I said, excuse me? She says, thou say it. I've never heard that before. It's a biblical phrase. And I says, well, I'll take that as a yes then.
Peter and Juliet were placed into 2 separate cars. She immediately started crying once she got into the back of my car. And her first question was, what's going to happen to them? She was very concerned over their welfare, what was going to happen to them, what we were going to do to them.
The detective said, Ed, I want you to stop everything right now and come directly down to the Sandy Police Department. And he said, I don't want you to stop or talk or make phone calls or anything. I just want you to come down here. I got down to the Sandy Police, and an officer said, oh, Mr. Smart, come this way. And I went down this hallway and turned to the right, and there was what I believe was a yellow door. As I got to the door, they said, well, we think we may have found Elizabeth. And I stood there, and I looked at this girl. What I saw there was a girl who was not the same Elizabeth that left. I just got her shoulders and I put her back, because there was not, I didn't feel like there was this tremendous emotion initially from her. And I said, Elizabeth, is it you? She said, yes, Dad. And I stood there crying and crying and crying.
I got a call from Ed, and he couldn't hardly talk. He just said, you know, I love you. Thank you. You know, I have her. It's real.
Can you come answer some questions? Can one quick comment down here? Come on. Just one. Come on.
I was just like, thank you. I mean, it was great. It was incredible, and just the rush of adrenaline that went through me. It was just like, yes, yes. It was almost like vindication.
Has been within just the last hour that Elizabeth Smart has been returned home. Her father, Ed Smart, came outside and said that she is home, and
I just about fell out of my chair. I was just going, wheels were turning, and I'm just going, what? I mean, it was like she came back to life. I mean, I was that stunned.
Utah's miracle. Elizabeth Smart is alive and well after 9 months, finally reunited with her family tonight.
I definitely think it's been a miracle. I don't know how else it can even be described. It's amazing. It does not make any logical sense.
Everybody's helped, everybody's prayed to do whatever they can. We thank God for all the searchers, for all the people in the history of the world. I don't think a little girl has been prayed for more than Elizabeth Smart, and we thank you for answering those prayers.
Thank you.
We not only that day got Elizabeth back, my kids got their dad back. You know, we all got our families back, and I don't think we would have ever had that. You know, we may have had a time where we kind of stumbled through and we would have gotten our lives back. a little bit because we had done everything we could do. But, you know, the suspicion of saying, well, it could have been this or it could have been that, it's just, you know, we're just incredibly grateful that it ended the way it did.
Elizabeth is doing well. She's beautiful. She's happy to be home, and we're so happy to have her home. She's doing the things that she should be doing. She could hardly wait for a bubble bath, and that's what she did, and she does it. I said, you can take it whenever you want. You can have as many as you want and as much bubbles, and we've had fun doing her hair and painting toenails.
For the Smart family, the years since Elizabeth's rescue have been challenging and painful. The euphoria of having Elizabeth home has been tainted by intense public interest and personal soul-searching.
The recovery of Elizabeth was phenomenal. The aftermath of that and everyone trying to put their lives back together is a whole nother story in and of itself. During the search we were so close, we were always communicating, we were always doing something, and
we were doing everything we possibly
and then after that kind of, you don't have that one common goal anymore.
I think that for, you know, a year and a half or 2 years, I think that in the extended family, it was just such a hard thing to have gone through that we were going through a form of post-traumatic stress.
Difficulties within the family were exacerbated by a book that Tom wrote in 2005. It detailed the police investigation.
And my wife said, well, what are your intentions on doing this? And she really didn't want me to continue doing it. I said, you know, if you ever want me to be back to who I am, you just need to let me tell the story and get it out.
In their memoirs, Edward and Lois largely avoided the details of Elizabeth's ordeal by concentrating on their own personal struggle as parents.
They were difficult times. You know, Lois and I were focusing on ourselves and how our family was doing, and those were not easy times for anyone.
I think we're about 80–85% healed from all that, and maybe that 15% you never will. That's just part of life and kind of the scars that everybody carries.
Times like what we went through those 9 months are so difficult and really tries your faith. I mean, if you have faith that there is a God and there is a Savior out there, why aren't you getting an answer? You're praying, why aren't you getting an answer to it? And 9 months we didn't get an answer.
Brian Mitchell, when he comes into a courtroom, you never know what he's going to do. He's broken into song, which effectively gets him thrown out of the courtroom. He's been disruptive. Hasn't been violent yet, but he hasn't been terribly cooperative with his counsel, so his legal counsel has changed several times.
Miss Barzee originally was less competent than she is now. Mr. Mitchell, however, because of his religious zeal or because of his mental illness, seems to be progressively angrier and seems to be more frustrated with the system. This is the Mitchell that took Elizabeth Smart and took her away from her family.
After 4 years of legal wrangling, Brian and Wanda are now being held in a mental hospital. They face charges of sexual assault and kidnapping. The courts are struggling to decide whether they are competent enough to stand trial.
The United States Supreme Court has told us that we should not force people to take medication without at least having a hearing. And the forced medication is an attempt to restore them to competency so we can try them and to make sure that they are well enough to understand what the proceedings are.
Whether it's all calculated or whether it's spontaneous, who knows? Who knows if he's just saying, this is how I can get thrown out of court.
I sat there and looked at Brian Mitchell, and I just thought to myself, how in the world did you ever get to the point that you have gotten to? How have you become so extreme that you can justify kidnapping a child? He is nothing more than a sex offender.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Since her return, Elizabeth has joined her father as an advocate for child protection. She lent her support to the Adam Walsh Act, which President Bush recently signed into law. The act calls for a nationwide register of sex offenders.
I was of the opinion, these bad things happen to other people. They don't happen to me. And of course, when it happened, you just realize the reality of life, that it does happen. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what your status is, they do happen.
We felt very strongly that Rad Kids is a program that teaches options to children.
We felt so good about it that we sent our children through the training program.
Elizabeth, she's definitely aware of what I'm doing, and she has been very helpful to try and support avoiding potential other abductions out there. I know that she would do anything she could to help prevent that.
Elizabeth has not spoken publicly about her ordeal. To America, she has been presented as a powerful image for child protection. Both Edward and Lois believe that controlling the media will allow Elizabeth to look forwards.
How do your friends treat you, Elizabeth? Obviously,
Regular.
They do? Yeah. Do they ever ask you about anything, or?
No.
No? They pretty much act
They
as
just say, it's just like you came back from a huge long vacation.
Really?
Yeah.
All of the interviews that she did were very controlled. She was with Katie Couric. The questions were, how are you doing? How's your life going? What are your future plans?
What were you most looking forward to?
You came to the realization, I'm not going to get any details here. I'm not going to find out what happened during those 9 months.
Tonight, the 14-year-old little girl taken from her own home in the night 4 years ago.
Earlier this year, one journalist abandoned the media's respect for Elizabeth's privacy.
And this brave girl is taking your calls.
That night, we had gone on and talked about the Adam Walsh bill. That was the reason we were on there. And prior to going on there, I told Elizabeth right up front, and I've tried to re-emphasize that, anything that is said that you feel uncomfortable about, you just pipe right up and let them know.
Did your kidnappers tell you they would hurt you or your family if you tried to get away?
They did. And I really am here to support the bill and not to go into what happened to me, what is in my past, because I'm not here to give an interview on that. I'm here to help push this bill through.
A lot of people have seen shots of you wearing a burqa. How did you see out of that thing?
I'm really not going to talk about this at this time. I mean, that's something I just don't even look back at, and I really, to be frankly honest, I really don't appreciate you bringing all this up.
I was disappointed, and actually I was upset. It's Elizabeth's life, and she has claimed that life, and she is in charge of that life.
People want to know why she didn't run, why she stayed with her captors for 9 months. And in my investigation, Brian and Wanda had a psychological hold on her that was unbreakable. That it took some outside intervention so that she would get away from them.
Elizabeth is a hero in the fact that she survived, and all of that other stuff is, I just don't think that any one of us, let alone being a young girl, would act any differently under the circumstances that she went through.
While Elizabeth was out there, you know, she depended very much on prayer and a knowledge of who she was, and that one day, you know, she would see us again. I mean, she said to me, I didn't know how long it would be, and it might have been a long time, but I did know that I would see you again.
I have the pleasure of presenting to you, Elizabeth, this National Courage Award.
Since her return to family life, Elizabeth appears to have made a remarkable recovery. She rejoined her Mormon community and after a period in counseling, went back to school. For the past 2 years, Elizabeth has studied music at university.
The biggest miracle to me isn't just that she came home, is that how solid Elizabeth seems.
Elizabeth is, I'd say, an anomaly, given how incredibly well she's done. And I come back to her faith, how strong she is in her faith.
Elizabeth is very much in control of her situation, and Elizabeth is a survivor. You know, I know that she learned a lot of things that I wish she hadn't, but I know that she learned a lot, and from the positive side, able to, you know, take the things that she learned and move forward.
Even though you have the best of all possible outcomes, you still have kind of wounds from being through such a traumatic experience. If there was one lesson that I think is important as far as this is, there's certainly hope. I mean, hope is a great lesson. It's not always completely dark, even in what we think is the darkest time.
As much as it was huge euphoria when she was found, it was huge euphoria because of how tragic it was what had happened before. The chilling part is that if she hadn't gotten found, I think 4 years later, it's pretty obvious she'd be part of that family and part of that compound. So I'm glad it's over, and I'm glad she's back.
I mean, life progresses and life moves on, and I don't live in the past. At least I don't feel like I do. There is nothing more important to me than my family, and having Elizabeth back home has been so wonderful. You know, she has really become herself. She is a strong self, and she knows that nobody has the right to hurt her.